So protections to women's reproductive rights got struck in the US recently, which is, as some might say, a cringe moment. Now, there's something to be said about how effectively one can change people's minds on the topic of abortion, since one's view on this topic is often not based on facts, but on the philosophical question of where life begins, and whether we should value more the bodily autonomy of a woman, or the supposed life, or even the potential for life of a fetus. Regardless of how well one can change people's minds on this question, I've noticed a lot of misinformation regarding what banning abortion does and doesn't do, and how it will affect women in the states where their reproductive rights are restricted. While there may or may not be an objective answer to a philosophical question, we do have answers for empirical ones, so I wanted to share 5 key facts about abortion to hopefully curb some of the misinformation that's out there on this topic. In a 2018 report, the Guttmacher Institute estimated that the abortion rate in the most restrictive countries was nearly the exact same as in countries with the least restrictions. For more restrictive countries, the rate was 37 per 1,000 women, and in less restrictive countries, it was 34 per 1,000 women for the period between 2010 and 2014. This is further supported by another study of theirs, which estimated that for the period between 2015 to 2019, the abortion rate in more permissive countries was 40 per 1,000 women, while for countries where it was most restricted, the rate was 36 per 1,000 women. It's worth noting, however, that when excluding China and India from the former group, as they skewed the results due to atypically high abortion rates, the researchers actually found that abortions occurred less frequently in the most permissive countries. It's unclear to what extent factors such as income and unintended pregnancies influence the abortion rate, as all these variables seem to interact with one another non-linearly. But it's worth pointing out that while the unintended pregnancy rate has declined since the 1990s, abortion rates have stayed mostly stable, suggesting that the women most likely to get an abortion in the first place will get an abortion regardless of whether they are restricted or not. Which brings us to the second key fact about abortion. While conservatives will often try to minimize the effects of an unintended pregnancy under the guise of it being some sort of blessing, the reality is that having a child when you're not ready can seriously mess up your life. Many people simply aren't financially or emotionally ready to take care of a kid, with this being the main reason for why women have abortions. And although some women will end up having the kid they were forced to carry, many of the women living in more restrictive places will resort to unsafe methods even if abortions are illegal. According to the 2018 report, in countries with the most restrictive abortion laws, 74.9% of abortions fell in the less or least safe categories. In countries classified as moderately restrictive, the percentage of unsafe abortions was 57.9%, while in the least restrictive countries this was only 12.6%. So while conservatives say they want to protect lives, the reality is that the policies that they want to implement lead to more women taking desperate measures that put their health at risk. Which brings us to the third key fact about abortion. While the phrase abortion is healthcare may sound like it's just a catchy slogan, research does show that access to abortion affects the health of women and children. A 2017 report by the Center for Reproductive Rights and IDU's Reproductive Health analyzed the relationship between abortion restrictions and indicators of women's and children's well-being, finding a negative relationship between the two across all measures. Now, there may or may not be a causal relationship between abortion restrictions and all of these variables. For example, we can expect higher maternal deaths in states with more restrictions since, as demonstrated earlier, more women have unsafe abortion in places with more restrictions, and there's always the chance of a woman dying during labor. However, even if the relationship between some of these variables is not causal, one has to wonder, why is there a correlation here in the first place? Conservatives claim to care so much about life, so why is life just worse in states that restrict abortions? Shouldn't these pro-lifers be doing everything they can to make life better? Well, this extremely difficult, mind-bending, and extremely complicated question is conveniently answered by the fourth key fact about abortion. The idea that right-wingers support abortion restrictions not due to some concern for life, but rather simply because they are sexist and wish to control women is fairly common among leftists. And while right-wingers insist that this is an unfounded stereotype, there is actually research on the topic of how much pro-life sentiment is really pro-life. A 2014 paper analyzed to what degree the humanization of fetuses could explain differences in opinion between liberals and conservatives regarding abortion, concluding that perceptions of preborn humanists explain very little of the difference in opinion between liberals and conservatives. By contrast, a 2017 study found that sexism accounted for 30 to 75% of the left-right difference in abortion stance. An earlier study found that authoritarianism had a significant correlation with an anti-abortion position and aggression towards women. And a 2019 study found that right-wing authoritarianism had a significant correlation with abortion stigma, both before and after controlling for other variables. This is consistent with the fact that an argument commonly presented by those who are pro-choice is not necessarily that the fetus isn't alive, but rather that the woman's right to bodily autonomy is simply more important than whatever life or potential for life the fetus might have. Ultimately, whatever opinion one might have about abortion, or where life starts, or how abortion bans will affect women, the reality is that the majority of Americans believe abortion should be legal in all or most cases. This decision to strike Roe v. Wade and state legislators enacting abortion bans is simply authoritarianism, a minority of unelected officials imposing their will onto others despite it going completely against what the American people actually want. Even in what are otherwise very right states, people are voting to maintain women's reproductive rights because most Americans don't want their freedoms taken away. Most people probably don't know about the facts mentioned in this video, and yet they are still willing to defend women's reproductive rights on principle. But now you know these facts, and hopefully they'll be useful for you to motivate even more people to defend women's rights. And to give you a little more help with this, I've also shared some of the graphs and studies I mentioned on the health site that is tweeter.com, in case you find yourself needing to retweet them to destroy some conservatives with facts and logic. If you found this video useful, consider sharing, liking, and subscribing. Also, my next video will be about how AI is affecting the art world, so if that sounds interesting at all, consider subscribing so you won't miss it.